Malcolm, great to have you on the show once again.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again, Mike.
Tell us about the cost of Australia's current climate change policies and how they're impacting on Australia.
Well, these costs that I'm about to share with you and your viewers are from the government's own data. In fact, they are government's own data, and that means that they're irrefutable. The government used to have these costs available in consolidated form, but you'll see why they no longer make it easy for people to get at it. Each year, just on electricity alone, the cost of climate and renewable energy policies is $13 billion. That works out at $1,300 per household. The government has been telling us that the cost of renewables is only 6% of the electricity bill, the typical electricity bill. The reality is it's 39%, more than 6 times as much. And that cost, the government has said, is $90 a year per electricity bill, typical electricity bill. In fact, the direct costs are $536 a year. The indirect costs, as I've just said, is $1,300 a year. And so what we've seen, in addition, in Spain and other countries, is that for each renewable energy job, 2.2 jobs are lost in the real productive sector. So that's why we're having so much trouble in this country, and that's why we've gone from being the lowest cost electricity in the world to now amongst the highest. We export our clean, high efficiency coal to China, India, and Asia, and they generate electricity using our coal and sell it at 8 cents a kilowatt hour. We buy it here in Australia from the same coal at 25 cents a kilowatt hour, 3 times as much because of the costs of all the regulations and rubbish that government has put on us about climate and renewable policies.
The CSIRO is our main scientific organisation, which is paid for by the government here in Australia. So for those overseas wondering what we're talking about next, you have some serious concerns about the advice the CSIRO, our main scientific body, has given to Parliament and the community over the years, advice that formed the basis of Australian climate change policies. Now, what are your most serious concerns, Malcolm?
Well, the most serious concerns, I'll read from extract from my report. First of all, the CSIRO has admitted in our cross-examination of it, we asked them to give us, Mike, 4 presentations in the course of 2 years. And in the course of those presentations, we cross-examined them. We're the only people anywhere in the world to cross-examine a government agency on a sustained basis. And the CSIRO admitted during our cross-examination that today's temperatures are not unprecedented. Yet global warming is the basis for climate change, and global warming said that we were facing unprecedented temperatures. Today's temperatures are not unprecedented. The second thing is that ultimately, the CSIRO has no empirical scientific evidence proving that carbon dioxide from human activity affects climate and needs to be cut. None. They cannot provide the necessary data in a structured scientific framework. What they end up relying upon always is the unvalidated computer models. These have been proven wrong. In fact, in terms of the upper troposphere, the models predicted a warming and a drying of the upper troposphere, warming and a moistening of the upper troposphere. The reverse has happened. And they don't understand so many aspects of climate, so many climate factors, and yet they're making policies based on this rubbish coming out of these models. That's the second thing. So there's no basis for policy. The third is that they're allowing politicians to misrepresent the CSIRO without correction. So we said to the CSIRO, what, if anything, is dangerous about carbon dioxide from human activity? And they said, we would never use the word danger. We never have and never will. And so we said, well, who's used that term? Because that's what politicians tell us. And they said, well, you better ask the politicians. So the CSIRO has never advised anyone that carbon dioxide from human activity is a danger and needs to be cut. They leave that to the politicians. And this is the final, I've got 10 key points, but I'll give you this one now in terms of moving on effectively. The CSIRO has never quantified any effect, any specific impact from human carbon dioxide. They have not even attributed 1/100th of a degree temperature rise to carbon dioxide from human activity. And that is no basis for policy. When we have policy, especially policy that's going to cost us trillions of dollars, Mike, we need to know what is the impact of what we're doing, what is the problem, in other words, and then what is the solution. We need to then cost the alternatives, and then we need to measure the implementation to see how we're going. Impossible to do any of those three. The whole thing is based on a sham.
It's, I mean, I've got to ask you something a bit left field here. One, it's not for a politician to tell a porky, so we hear lots of porkies. But what is even more alarming is there's no accountability. The media just rolls along with it too. So in your humble opinion, which is worse, the porky from the politician or the lack of information or misinformation coming from the media?
Well, the porky from the politician is far worse, because people know that the media exaggerates, has an agenda, tries to sell scary stories with headlines. But the politicians, they trust. Now, we all know that people don't trust politicians. But when push comes to shove in Australia, we tend to go with what the political leaders tell us. And that's flawed, because the problem with the political arena these days, Mike, is that most of the politicians, all of the politicians, except for myself and Dennis Jensen used to be in politics, they don't understand the science. They could not have the conversation that I can have with the CSIRO. Not one of them. Well, maybe Gerard Rennick could from the Liberal Party, and Craig Kelly can with the Bureau of Meteorology. But and they both don't believe this nonsense. But the politicians will swallow just about anything. I've made a list of about 17 different things that the media and alarmists use to deviate the conversation away from science. And what I call those things as aspects that people use instead of science. And that's what you'll see coming out of the mouths of politicians. And the lay people around the country think that the politicians are talking science. They're not. They're talking rubbish. And so what happens is the politicians have far more impact than the media, because people think that the politicians are credible and have been advised. They have not been advised. They're just lying.
All right, back to the CSIRO. So what are the implications of this for Australia and our obligations to the Paris Agreement?
Well, we're going to be decimated economically, because we cannot afford to continue with these policies. And now that we know there's no basis for them, Mike, the most significant impact that's driven human progress in the last 170 years of industrialization. And think how far we've come in just 170 years. Hundreds of thousands of years in the past, and we got to just a point where we were living a rural lifestyle with minimal manufacturing. Now look at where we are. And so that has been made possible because of cheap energy. And the single trend that's driven it is an ever-decreasing real cost of electricity and energy. In real terms, the costs have always gone down. When the cost of energy goes down, the productivity of a society increases. When the society productivity increases, wealth increases, prosperity increases. We have got more flexibility, more options, more choice, more security, more comfort, more ease. What's happened in this country in the last 20 years is a doubling of electricity prices. So we've reversed the trend, and it's been done despite technology improvements that would have led to an ever-decreasing cost of electricity and energy. And we've done it instead we've increased it because of regulations and stupidity from government. And it started with Bob Hawke. It was put on steroids with John Howard, and then turbocharged with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. And Malcolm Turnbull has ramped it up again. And now we've got Scott Morrison, who denies that there's anything wrong. And so these people are living in pixie land. But the consequences are that we will be decimating our economy. We will make it uneconomic. We've already shipped a lot of our manufacturing overseas, which has made us dependent on overseas countries, which has removed our economic security, our economic sovereignty. It's hammered our economic resilience and our productive capacity. Agriculture, we've got a drought. We've had a drought until recently, and lots of Queensland still in drought. And yet at the height of the drought last year, farmers in North Queensland, Central Queensland and Southern Queensland were telling me they could not afford the water prices to grow fodder in a drought. And we can't grow fodder. I mean, this is ridiculous. We're crippling our food supply. with this stupidity. So it also means that we are beholden to the United Nations agreements, the Lima Declaration, the Rio Declaration, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Donald Trump has shown us the way we need to pull out of all of these things. And Donald Trump has shown us the way of pulling out of Paris. We need to do the same.
What do your findings mean for other countries in our region then, Malcolm?
Well, it mightn't be nice in terms of what our country has to hear, but we're going to go down economically and we'll be less competitive. And I think also there's a potential for being less stable and destabilized. Both the tired old parties, the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Party and the Labor Party, are split on this climate issue. We've had, in the course of 6 years, 6 prime ministers, the last 6 prime ministers have all been dumped in large measure due to climate policies, because there's a significant split in the Labor Party and a significant split in the Liberal Nationals. There are people, as you know, right now in this country, in the Labor Party, who really belong in the Greens. And there are people in the Labor Party who came from the old Labor Party and want to protect the workers. And they're having an almighty tussle right now. And there's even talk of Joel Fitzgibbon putting on a threat to a challenge to Anthony Albanese. In the Liberal National Party, we have the same. We have some Liberals who really belong in the Greens, and we have some Liberals and Nationals who are true Liberals and Nationals. Now, the net result is that neither the Labor Party is like the old party, and neither the Liberal Nationals are like the true Liberal Nationals. They've become semi-green. And so what we're seeing is splits in these parties, and that's not good for a stable government. We're also seeing then what happens is the Greens set the agenda from the United Nations. They've done that on many, many areas: land rights, water, native vegetation, Environment Protection, Biodiversity Act, energy, climate. And then the Labor Party is afraid of losing some of its left wing to the Greens. So the Labor Party moves to the left and takes up green policy. And then some people in the Liberal Party are worried that they will lose votes to the Labor Party. So we then see the Liberals moving left. And what that means is that we will have, ultimately, we've got this in the way of policy formulation. Scott Morrison knows that he has to be seen to be doing something about climate. Most of his senior ministers, many of his senior ministers, do not believe that we need to do anything, but they say in public that they will, that we do. So what they do then is they look at Labor and they realize Labor's moved into stupid territory, absurd territory. And so all Scott Morrison has to do is to do slightly less absurd policies that'll do less damage, and make sure then that he captures the votes of people who don't believe we need to do anything, as well as those who do. The net result is we have policies that are not justified and that are costing our country a lot of money. And so we have people like Matt Canavan, for example, who was the chief of staff of Barnaby Joyce. And Barnaby Joyce was without doubt the most outspoken and outstanding speaker on climate. He was a complete skeptic on it and spoke very effectively and colourfully. He got the message through. Barnaby Joyce left the Senate and became an MP in New England, New South Wales. His chief of staff as a senator was Matt Canavan. Matt Canavan then took on Barnaby Joyce's Senate role. Both of them were skeptics. When they both entered cabinet, lips shut. They fell silent. And then Matt even spoke in favour of doing something about carbon dioxide from human activity to pander to the climate alarmists within the Liberal Party. Then when Barnaby and Matt recently left the cabinet, they both started murmuring, but they're not game to come out now because they'd be hypocrites. They're both starting to murmur about the skeptic side. So we see that this is a lack of courage, a lack of conviction, a lack of integrity, and that's what's driving politics in this country. And who pays for all of this? The people.
Just to get back to the truth, and as Jack Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. So maybe that's part of it. And we're all a bit in cotton wool at the moment, and don't know what's going to happen. COVID, climate change. We might all just freeze to death because it's getting colder, not warmer. Who knows? Malcolm Roberts, Senator Malcolm Roberts, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Mike. Thank you for having me.